Well, one day I found in softonic.com a product called Velneo. I read about it a bit, but I didn't download, and I completely ignored it. Little by little, I began to read and learn more about it and began developing, testing here and there on a trial-error basis. And with time, I learned to build business applications with Velneo. I visited the forum and saw the community around Velneo had a lot of potential. The first thing that really surprised me was that everything was assisted. I didn't have to get into messy coding. You are like the director of an orchestra where the music is played by itself without musicians. I am used to coding here and there, compiling, checking on how the application binds, logic processes, runtime errors. But with Velneo, it's completely different. In the past, I worked with Visual Basic to program in Windows, and this last year, I have used mostly Delphi, version 6. If we talk about the graphical appearance of the applications, I prefer Delphi. With Velneo, when I build the graphic user interface, I focus on the web user interface and web design. The first application I developed with Velneo was for a physiotherapy center, and the results were great because I followed a web interface design line with flaps, with web type menus, and an end-user web type interface. I think this is the key to create good graphical user interfaces with Velneo.
Yo creo que ese es el secreto para hacer interfaces gráficas de usuario con Velneo. Pues de Velneo lo que más me gusta es que te ahorra mucho tiempo.
What I most like about Velneo is that it saves you an incredible amount of developing time. It allows you to focus on case studies and layout and setup of the database. If you learn how the Velneo Advanced Relational Database Model works, the rest is very easy. If you keep several maps in Velneo's item repository, you don't need to perform repetitive functions related to grids, forms, finders, etc. I remember trying Homero, the example library database, and I will never forget when I opened the alphabetical book list. It only took a fraction of a second, and suddenly I noticed that it had already run through the 60,000 records. I was absolutely shocked. I could not believe that it had opened 60,000 records in a fraction of a second. To say the truth, it was really impressive. I think about it many times. How is it possible? I suppose the secret is in the indexes and the pointers it uses. But I really don't know how they could create something with such performance. That's the word, performance. With other databases, you can use indexes and multiple indexes. You can create all kinds of functions, and still, MySQL is a very fast database, but I don't know. I have never managed more than 60,000 records with MySQL, but I tend to think that it can't open all those records in a fraction of a second the way Velneo's database does. What I less like is, let's see, I don't know what to say. What I less like is perhaps the map editor. If you compare the map editor with all the rest of the products, the server, the runner, or the navigator, I think it's a bit behind. Perhaps, yes. Maybe it's the editor. With other tools, you have to sequentially go through record lists or code algorithm functions to manage data. And with Velneo, you have to be sure of what you want to do from the very beginning. Create a table design, a table scheme with the appropriate pointers that you know are going to save you the hard work, and then put it all together. This is like when you have children games. You can have a Meccano set where you have to screw on the nuts, build it all yourself. The result is going to be a bit of a framework, perhaps. Maybe the end-user product does not have the best finish of all. It has taken you a lot of time, and perhaps you feel more proud and so. But with Velneo, it's kind of like a Lego, perhaps. They give you the pieces and you click them together. It takes much less time. The final product has a better finish, more professional, and everything has a greater performance. To start out, I wouldn't compare Visual Basic to Velneo, because Visual Basic is not such a fourth generation product like Velneo is. In Visual Basic, managing Windows, message control, with your operating system and your application is all automatic, and that's great. You can mess around with the application's code in the beginning as much as you want to, because it's very difficult for the binary to break down from the very start. But it's simply just that, a management system between the program's control and the operating system. You have to do all the rest on your own, and it's not as assisted as Velneo. Velneo, besides all this, offers completely assisted programming almost all the time. With Visual Basic, you don't have any other alternative but to code all day. You have to adapt to the code. With Velneo, you also have to adapt to it, but since the code is auxiliary, you can choose other alternatives to avoid coding. You can encounter the coding parts in different ways. Instead of using code processes to perform updates or other things, you can follow Velneo's philosophy and use the item repository and other tools that the vDevelop offers to avoid coding and coding all day. The installers for Visual Basic applications are a bit hectic because you have to use the runtime. You have to use some DLLs that sometimes are in the operating system and sometimes they are not. Perhaps you have to crush DLLs that are already installed and you use a previous version, and this makes other programs malfunction. In Velneo, you simply install the encrypted map or the open code map and a few DLLs that work with the runner. If you want to use the runner with dynamic libraries, and normally 99% of the time, not to say 100% of the times according to my experience, it never fails. The truth is that it always works very well.